chaos. He walked up to the statue, touched the grey dust, and inhaled. The use of actual particulate matter, he whispered. The way it settles on the foam, it represents the inevitable decay of the ego, the way the past literally clings to the present. Serafina, it's your most profound work. Using the ashes of the ancestors to coat the struggle of the living? Brilliant. Serafina blinked. She straightened her back. Yes, she said, her voice dripping with sudden confidence. I call this technique the Ash of Ages. It was a very deliberate choice. Barnaby looked at the vacuum. Monty looked at the statue. Penelope looked at the baby bump. Fine, Barnaby said, wiping a bit of Aunt Gertrude off his nose. But if the art critic likes it, I'm charging you for the cleaning bill. Epilogue. A new beginning. A week later, Peace of a Sort returned to Oakhaven. Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. In a rare moment of compromise, he was named Barnaby Zenith Sterling Holloway. They just called him B. Z. Monty eventually confessed that Aunt Gertrude was actually a decorative urn he'd bought at a thrift store to gain sympathy after his breakup, and that the ashes were mostly high-quality grey cement powder. The family decided not to tell the art critic. Serafina's statue was sold to a museum for a staggering sum. She gave the Holloways a small commission, which Barnaby used to buy a solid gold meat slicer. Lord Arthur Sterling finally got his silence back, though he found himself occasionally missing the sound of the jackhammers. It was, he decided, much quieter than his wife's artistic process, and in the quiet hills of Oakhaven, the serpent and the siren finally found a way to live together, mostly by staying in separate rooms and only meeting for Sunday lunch. The Harrington Chronicles, a symphony of jackhammers, ashes, and avant-garde ambitions. Chapter 1. The Sculptor's Silence and the Neighbor's Drill. In the leafy, overly manicured suburb of Elderberry Grove, the Harrington family was known for two things: their legendary Sunday roasts and their ability to turn a minor misunderstanding into a multi-generational blood feud. At the center of the current storm was Penelope Harrington, a woman who didn't just do art, she suffered for it. Penelope was currently working on her magnum opus for the National Sculpture Biennale. She called it the Metamorphosis of Irony. But to her father, Barnaby Harrington, it looked like a pile of rusted pipes that had lost a fight with a bulldozer. Penelope, darling, Barnaby shouted over the screeching sound of a circular saw coming from the house next door. I think the neighbor, Mr. Sterling, is trying to reach the Earth's core through his basement floor. Penelope dropped her chisel, her face a mask of artistic agony. I cannot create in these conditions. My soul requires silence, and all I get is the rhythmic thumping of Sterling's home renovation. He's been fixing that porch for 3 years. At this point, I'm convinced he's building a secret lair for a Bond villain. Barnaby's wife, Martha, entered the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron that said, World's Greatest Grandma. In training. Now, let's be charitable. Maybe he's just installing a bidet. Everyone wants a bidet these days. Julian and Serafina have one that sings Enya when you sit on it. Julian was the middle Harrington son, a man who had recently traded his law degree for a yoga mat and a deep, abiding interest in conscious breathing. His wife, Serafina, was 8 months pregnant and currently vibrating at a frequency that Penelope found spiritually intrusive. We should move Penelope to the old Port house, Clara suggested. Clara was the eldest Harrington daughter, the only one who seemed to have a functioning internal compass. Her husband, Arthur, nodded vigorously, mostly because he wanted Penelope out of the house so he could watch the football game without hearing about the texture of despair. The old Port house. Penelope's eyes lit up. The historic district. The Parthenon of urban decay. I shall find my inspiration there. Chapter 2. The Kukaki Migration. The move to the old Port district was supposed to be a sanctuary. Instead, Penelope found herself living in an apartment where the walls were so thin she could hear the neighbor, a man named Silas, deciding whether he wanted skim or whole milk in his coffee. Silas was a baker who suffered from a perpetual state of romantic yearning. He was currently pining for a woman named Faye, a local folk singer who had recently broken up with him because he smelled too much like sourdough. Back at the main Harrington estate, Barnaby was facing a different crisis. The arrival of a package from Australia. "It's from Aunt Gertrude," Barnaby announced, staring at a heavy wooden crate. She always promised she'd return to the motherland. She just didn't specify in what state. Martha peered at the crate. "Aunt Gertrude? The one who ran away with the sheep shearer in the 70s? The very one. She's passed on, Martha. And according to the letter, her final wish was to be scattered in the Aegean Sea. But first, she wanted to spend one last week in a Harrington household." Martha gasped. "You mean she's in the crate?" "In a manner of speaking. She's in a very ornate, very expensive-looking ceramic vase." Barnaby opened the crate to reveal a dark, dusty urn. He placed it on the mantelpiece, right next to Julian's most improved yoga student trophy. Try not to get knocked over during the naming ceremony. Chapter 3. The War of the Names. The naming ceremony was a Harrington tradition, usually involving a lot of wine, and Barnaby demanding that every male child be named Barnaby Harrington III, IV, or V. However, Julian and Serafina had other plans. "We've decided," Julian said, his voice as calm as a wind chime in a light breeze. "The child shall be named Kananda." The silence in the room was so thick you could have carved it with Penelope's chisel. "Kananda?" Barnaby repeated, his face turning a shade of purple that Penelope would have called violent sunset. "Is that a country? A brand of luxury SUV? A rare species of fern?" "It means learning and perception in an ancient dialect," Serafina explained, rubbing her belly. "We want him to have a name that vibrates with the universe." "I'll tell you what's vibrating," Barnaby roared. "My blood pressure. You can't name a Harrington kid Kananda. They'll ask him if he's a province in Canada." "It's Kananda, father." "Not Canada," Julian corrected. Arthur leaned over to Clara. "I'm pretty sure I saw a brand of organic lentils called Kananda once." Clara sighed. "Just let it happen, Arthur. If we fight them, they'll change it to something worse, like Table or Tuesday." Chapter 4. The Great Ash Incident. While the family debated the merits of lentils as names, Silas the baker was making a desperate move. He had heard Penelope, whom he mistook for a relative of Faye, was staying at the old port house. He decided to send her gifts to win his way back into the Harringtons' good graces, or at least get a referral to Faye. He sent flowers. He sent a donkey. Long story, involving a local farm. Finally, he sent a jar of his finest, most expensive artisan sourdough starter dust. A grey powdery substance that looked remarkably like, well, ashes. At the Harrington house, the real disaster was unfolding. Barnaby had hired a new cleaner, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who was remarkably efficient and almost entirely blind without her glasses. She saw the grey dust on the mantelpiece, which was actually a small amount of Silas's sourdough dust that had leaked, and decided the entire urn was a filthy old vase full of fireplace soot. "I'll just give this a quick rinse," Mrs. Higgins muttered. She took Aunt Gertrude to the kitchen sink. 10 minutes later, Penelope walked in to find Mrs. Higgins scrubbing the inside of the urn with a lemon-scented abrasive. "Mrs. Higgins, what are you doing?" Penelope shrieked. "Cleaning this old pot, dear." Penelope felt the world tilt. "The garden bed? You dumped Aunt Gertrude into the petunias? Who's Gertrude? Is she a type of fertilizer?" Chapter 5. Operation Reconstruct, a relative. The panic that followed was of a magnitude Elderberry Grove had never seen. Penelope, Silas, who had wandered in to check on his sourdough dust, Julian, and Clara were all on their hands and knees in the garden, trying to distinguish between Aunt Gertrude and high-grade potting soil. "I found a bit," Silas shouted, holding up a grey clump. "That's a pebble, Silas," Penelope snapped. "God, why is my life a Greek tragedy written by a monkey?" "We have to fix this," Julian said, looking remarkably stressed for someone who practiced mindfulness. "If Barnaby finds out we turned his favorite aunt into mulch, He'll disinherit us. He's already mad about the Kananda thing. Wait, Penelope said.